Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight on Seek Speaks. Tonight we're going to be speaking about approved private special education programs. And I'd like to, before I do that, I'm going to give a little plug for Seek. Seek's mission is to secure an excellent education as a basic civil and human right for students with disabilities in Connecticut. Seek is the first and only organization in Connecticut created to influence policy discussion and shape legislative efforts on behalf of students with disabilities that is made up of parents, educational professionals, and special education attorneys and advocates. So your donations really help Seek protect rights, empower families, and shape the policies that shape lives. So I implore you to consider donating to Seek. I will put a link in the chat, or you can go to Seek's website, which is Seek, SEEKCT.com. And at the bottom of that first page, you'll see some options on how to donate. Tonight, as I said, we're going to be talking about approved private special education placements, and Andrew Feinstein, a special education attorney and the treasurer and legislative chair of SEEK, will be facilitating the conversation. We also have with us Karen Helene, who is a school director of Benhaven, which specializes in students with autism and related developmental disabilities, correct me if I'm wrong, and has both a day and residential program. We also have Jeff Bravin, who is the executive director of the American School for the Deaf, which is a comprehensive educational program for deaf and hard of hearing students. It has both day and residential programs as well. And William DeHaven, who is the head of school for Villa Maria, which is a day school for students with learning disabilities. And we have Heidi, who is Jeff's interpreter. Thank you all for joining us. Before I hand this off to Andy, I just need to give a quick disclaimer, which is that the views expressed tonight are those of the speakers and not necessarily Seek as an organization. Nothing discussed here tonight should be interpreted as legal advice. This event is intended to inform, empower, and engage, not to replace guidance from an actual attorney. So with that, Andy, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Dana, and thank you all for joining us. I think I want to set this in context first, which is that the issue of out-of-district private placements has come to the fore because the Select Committee on Special Education of the Connecticut Legislature has proposed legislation which, in effect, seems to limit private placements. It does that in a number of ways. Perhaps the most concerning is it would set up a fee schedule as it exists in a number of states for what private placements can charge. And the concern there is that if the fee schedule is being set up to control costs, as it is, and if the rates are too low, schools will go out of business. Nobody's going to operate a school totally at a loss. And if it's set, the alternative option is what we've seen with so many regulatory agencies, which the regulatory agency becomes captive of those that they're regulating, and the rates get too high and in fact end up costing more money. And so doing this has to be done very carefully, which at least the bill put out by the Select Committee does not do it carefully, but as the bill's being amended with a lot of input from all of us, maybe things will become more reasonable on that. But let's start off with the first question. Why do these private schools exist? Why can't kids just be educated in their own districts? And I guess I'll start off with Jeff on that one.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you, Seek, for hosting this event tonight. It's always nice to be able to talk with other special education schools about the work that we all do. The American School for the Deaf, as some of you may or may not know, was established in 1817, and it was the very first special education institution in the Western Hemisphere. There was no other special education institution back in those days. So we were founded as an educational facility for deaf and hard of hearing students. And that is still true even today. There are so many schools that are able to serve students, including deaf and hard of hearing students. But as is true for many other disabilities, we have a continuum of different abilities for deaf and hard of hearing students. And so we have some students that are able to take courses in mainstream settings, in the public school settings, but they may need interpreters or note takers or other kinds of additional supports to allow them to be able to function in a public school. Here at the American School for the Deaf, the students come and have no other needs that have to be supported because they have direct access to their education and communication at our school, both through American Sign Language and English. Some of our students do have additional disabilities, so they may need that one-to-one support or have other supports for their disabilities aside from deafness. And that is the reason why we have a school like ours, so that we're able to provide the maximum kind of language and learning opportunities for our students.
Thank you. Oh, I'll go to Karen. Same question. Why do we have these private schools? Why can't the kids who go to Benhaven attend their local public schools?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Benhaven is about 58 years old, so not 1817, far from 1817. But our school meets the needs of students with autism and intellectual disability and other related disabilities. And many of them have been in public schools and have needs that can't be met in that setting. And so, the private special education school is able to provide expertise that may be difficult in a general education setting where special ed teachers need to know a wide variety of disabilities and techniques. At Benhaven School, we really focus on the disability of autism and how it interacts with intellectual disability, really specializing in those teaching strategies really tailored to meet the learning needs of our students. We have small class sizes. And I think that, and a forgiving environment, middle school, high school with their bells, and all those transitions are not necessarily a good fit for kiddos who have difficulty with transitions.
Okay. And Bill?
I would love to tell everyone my origin story at Villa, but it doesn't match Jeff or Karen's. We're only 51 years old. I'll save my story for a little bit, but I think it's important. When my parents come in for an interview, they do not want to be at Villa. They don't move to North Stamford to send their kids to Villa. My families who are coming from 14 different districts in Connecticut and 13 in New York are there in response to a problem. Special education, the way it works is broken. Our kids are not getting the skills that they need. They don't fit in anyone's box. And so my kids at Villa struggle with language and executive functions. And so they struggle with the mechanics of language, like dyslexia, the decoding of the sound to symbol. They struggle with meaning-based. So my kids with social pragmatic struggles, understanding the comprehension piece, the social pragmatic piece, they struggle with language. And when I'm struggling with that language and have a weak processing speed and weak working memory and sitting in a classroom with 20 kids, it's really hard. And it's really hard for a school system that is designed to teach a curriculum and not teach our kids. And our kids get left behind, and the gap gets bigger and bigger every year. And so that's why families end up at schools like Villa.
Well, let me ask you, Bill. I mean, there's the things you do are things that public schools claim they're able to do.
Yeah.
But they don't.
No, I think the literacy movement is a great one, right? The fact that districts now want to do literacy education, especially in the early grades, but what has happened is that there is maybe 1 or 2 teachers in a school for 300 or 400 kids, instead of having all of their teachers with an Orton-based literacy program so that they're trained to teach our kids. And so I think that they want to do that, or they try and pull out. So the biggest problem for many of my kids is that if I am a struggling reader in 4th grade and I'm reading on a 1st grade level and I'm getting pulled out a few times a week to get reading instruction, and maybe that reading instruction is with other kids who also struggle with decoding, I'm put back then in my 4th grade social studies and my 4th grade science class, expected to read that 4th grade social studies and 4th grade science. And so that gap keeps getting bigger. I get really frustrated. And so those pullouts pull me out of the community that I'm there to be part of. And then I'm stuck back in the content areas and still overwhelmed.
It is public policy, and in fact, almost holy writ in some places, that kids do better being educated side by side with their non-disabled peers. Is that a loss for kids that go to each of your schools? I'll start with Bill, who has probably the hardest case of that.
Oh, no, I may have the easiest. I think that we all three would agree. You know, the law says our kids are in the most restrictive environments, but in our environments, our kids can fully participate in the program. They can be in drama, they can be in sports teams, they can be in talent shows, they're in student leadership, opportunities that are available to them in the public school, but not really available to them in the public school. So they're truly part of a community in this most restrictive environment that they're unable to be in their local public school.
Karen, do you want to add to that?
You know, I have a really great example of that, Bill. So probably about 20 years ago, we were referred a student from a district. He was in his public school, but he was in his special education class all the time. In fact, and even in that class, he was cornered in a corner of the room by bookcases, not permitted to walk through the class and even interact with the classmates within that resource room, and had very limited to no access to the rest of the school. When his mother came to visit our school, she said the instant she walked in, she felt that her son would feel this sense of belonging here. And you know, I agree with everything that Bill said, that these are our schools. I'll speak for Benhaven, at least provides a setting where kids can feel like they're part of a community, where I think in public schools, and sometimes often because of maybe some challenging behavior, Benhaven works with students who have some challenging behavior, and for their safety and student safety, you know, they may be segregated in a part of the school to keep them safe and others safe. At Benhaven School, when they come in, they're part of this larger school community. And I hope, and I think they do feel like they're home when they're at Benhaven School.
I'm well aware, Jeff, of the sharp division, at least a few years ago, in the deaf community between those who thought that their community should be with deaf people using sign only, and the verbal community that thought that you know, that students with hearing loss ought to be able to communicate with others. Can you talk a little bit about horizontal versus vertical communities, or however you define those?
Sure. So first of all, I very much like how you framed this around the least restrictive environment, because I call our school a language rich environment. So LRE, it's the same acronym. And don't get us wrong, I think that public schools are able to do a lot of things if they have appropriate resources, if they have the right people that have the right kind of training. But the reality is, oftentimes that is not the case. For example, talking about special education classrooms, oftentimes within the classrooms, they have students with multiple different kinds of disabilities, but they call that inclusive. And oftentimes that is not the case. You can't have that be effective, because in order to address all of them, you have to have a wide range of skill sets. You basically have to have a super person that's able to meet all the needs within that room. And that's why we have schools like ours, where we have the people that have been trained. They understand how to approach the students. They understand how their thinking works. They understand their learning processes. And in our community, as you said, it can be challenging. We do have two different groups and maybe even more than that with varying perspectives. But regardless of that, we have students that come to our school who probably could hear well because of the technology that is coming out today. Technology continues to evolve and improve. There are digital hearing aids, there are cochlear implants. We have all kinds of technology. However, I've been in this field for 30 years now. And what I would say, in all honesty, is that every child is different. I've never seen any two children that are alike. We can have two students with a cochlear implant. One may thrive and be able to hear and speak clearly. The other student may find that the cochlear implants don't benefit that at all. But because people have had experience with that one student that had a benefit from the cochlear implants, they just assume every deaf child will be able to benefit from having a cochlear implant. But that is not the case. And so our challenge is making sure that every child has the earliest exposure to language. The brain is like a sponge at those younger ages, from birth until 8 years old. That is where children are absorbing language. And so if you decide to only speak to a deaf child, and it just happens that that child's not going to benefit from spoken language, they are going to fall behind in that language development. That's why I say at the onset, give them everything, the sign language, the spoken language, and then let the student grow and thrive in an environment that is language rich. By the time that child is 8, 9, 10 years old, if they're able to speak and hear just fine, then send them off to a public school and they'll be fine. That's okay. Other students prefer to stay at our school because they love the signing environment and the language. I use myself as an example. I grew up going to a deaf school. I learned the language until I was about in 8th grade. And at that point, I realized I wanted to go on and see what a public school experience was like. And at that point, I was able to succeed in a public school because I had that strong language foundation and I had the right people around me that understood how I learned and how I could process language. And I had that peer-to-peer interaction, which is vital to that language growth and development. And if I had that at the beginning at a public school, if I wasn't able to be around peers that could sign, I would have missed out on all of that. So that's very important to consider.
Thank you. I want to ask each of you um, about your student body, how big it is, how many are from Connecticut, um, how many are placed in Connecticut by PPTs with IEPs, and also in that regard, how many staff you have? What kind of staff to student ratio do you have? And I'll go. I'll start with Jeff on that since.
So within our school, I'll start broadly and then I'll speak more specifically. We serve over 550 students through different programs. We have a birth to 3 program where we serve all families that have a child identified with a hearing loss. And currently we have 130 families in that birth to 3 program. We have our regular core academic program where students come for a regular education, just like what you would find in a regular K through 12 public school. And we have about 110 students in that program. And about 108 of those students are from Connecticut.
Oh.
There are 2 to 4 that come to us from out of state in the core program, but that is going to change this coming fall because we're going to be opening up a 7-day dorm program. So we're going to be accepting students from out of state. And so that number will grow and look different next year. We also have our PACES program, and that is a residential treatment program that we have on campus. And that serves deaf and hard of hearing students that have emotional or behavioral disorders. And that is at our school 24/7, 365 days a year. We never close our doors. However, within that program, we do have some day students that are able to commute each day back and forth from home. Several years ago, we also opened up that program to accept hearing autistic students who are nonverbal. Because what we found is that they do struggle with expressing themselves verbally. And so we realized that those students are able to express themselves through sign language. And so we started with just 3 students 3 years ago, and we now have about 18 students in that program. And that is one of the fastest growing programs we have because we're able to specialize in sign language and the use of sign language instead of using devices relying on iPads and other devices, which for some students is fine and does work well. But for those that are not able to express themselves verbally and the technology doesn't work well, they're able to express themselves through sign language. We also have an online academy, and That is online programming that serves deaf and hard of hearing students across the globe. We have over 240 students currently enrolled in our online academy. And most of the courses that we offer are supplemental learning. So perhaps there is a deaf or hard of hearing student in a mainstream program. There's no deaf school near them. They can take those classes. And also, internationally speaking, they don't have a strong enough deaf education program like we do here in America. So we're able to work with those students. Now, almost all of those programs have students placed in our programs by the districts. There's no parent placements with the exception of just a few of the international students. Those can be parent placements, but most of them are government funded and government placed to our school. So I hope I answered all of the questions that you asked.
Well, no, how about size of faculty?
I'm going to hit 400 faculty and staff this coming fall. So it's huge. It's a tremendous program. And the reason for that is, for example, when we look at our PACES program that serves the students with emotional and behavioral needs, we have 43 students currently enrolled in that program. Most of those students do require a one-to-one staff member to provide supports. So we're talking about first shift, second shift, overnight shift, weekend day, and then weekend overnight shifts. And then you're talking about educators for this particular program. You're talking about counselors, clinicians, psychologists, nurses. So that program, even though it's only 43 students, they have about 200 staff members dedicated just for those students. And it's a very specialized program. Our regular academic program is a little different. Our class ratio is 1:8 in our core academic program, which is typical for most deaf programs across the country.
Okay, Karen, up. Your turn.
Yeah, so Benhaven works with students ages, Benhaven School, 5 to 22. We have 7 classrooms. Each classroom has about 6 students in it. Our staffing ratio, there are 3 different types of staffing ratios. So our standard staffing ratio is 2 students per staff. We have some students who require additional support only in the community. And so they'll have one-to-one staff for job training, for any kind of community learning, mostly because the community can be more unpredictable, or they might be, they just need additional support in that kind of environment. And then we have a number of students. Most of our students actually are one-to-one. All of our students have an intellectual disability, IQs below 70. And all have a diagnosis of autism. We have a couple of students who additionally have a diagnosis of catatonia. That's been new to us to really try to get up to speed and figure out the best way to support those students. Most of our students are non-speaking, and so the devices that Jeff spoke about, we have a number of students who are very, very successful with iPads and different apps on the iPad. So that's been the single greatest technology, I think, for the autism community, especially the non-speaking autism community. It's just really opened up doors for many, many kids. Many students come to Benhaven because of, as I mentioned earlier, some challenging behavior. They have difficulty regulating emotions and their emotional state, even with co-regulation, and so may experience some self-injurious behavior, may have aggressive behavior, and that's been difficult to figure out, tough nut to crack in other settings. And so our staff, we have 9 or 10 teachers, so 7 classroom teachers, and then a PE teacher, a vocational transition teacher. And then we have about 40 paraeducators who also work in the classrooms and with the students. We have a speech department and an occupational therapy department. And we spend a lot of time figuring out functions of behavior. So what do we think that this behavior is communicating, and how can we help the person learn more socially acceptable and safe ways to communicate? We love Ross Green's notion of catching it early, because the behavior is actually late. So we work really hard to try to figure out what's happening early, so that we don't get to that point. Did I answer all your questions?
No.
No. Okay. Tell me what I missed.
You missed placement. Are that all?
Oh, yes. all of our students are placed by the school district. They come in with a IEP. At the placement PPT, we might change that a bit. For example, if somebody has a goal to swipe their card at the cafeteria, we don't have a cafeteria, so we're going to modify that that goal. But they do come in with an IEP that we commit to implementing.
Your turn, Bill.
Okay. 67 students this year.
Oh,
First-
good.
Yeah, we have grown. We are accredited just yesterday, got to 10th grade. We opened up a high school this year. We have 5 9th graders this year. I will have 15 9th and 10th graders next year, which has been wonderful. 67 students, 28 staff members for those 67 students. When I started at Villa 5 years ago, we had fewer than 10% of our kids outplaced by districts. Now, this year, we have a little over 40%. So that number is getting increasing. The number of districts that are trusting the process with us. I think that's one of my frustrations with this bill, is that we've developed wonderful relationships with the districts to show them and hold us accountable, come in and see the work that we're doing. And they've been really great relationships. I got your answer. I think I got all three. I got my number.
Oh, I think so. You know, and obviously, depending, you know, we're seeing very different
Yes.
staff to student ratios based on the needs of students.
Yeah.
Yeah. And let me just, you know, drill down a little bit on the bill. Each student obviously is an individual. Each student has, at least placed by a district, has an IEP, and IEPs require different things. Is it accurate to say that the cost of providing for each individual student may be different based on the IEP?
Yes. I'll answer it. I think that very much is yes. And we're trying to have one tuition that's all inclusive. I'm not a believer in the term related services, because I don't think that SLP or OT or counseling should be related to what our kids get. So we call it an integrated services team. But I've got kids with real severe language needs who may need more support. And so it varies. We're just trying to make sure that we're giving every individual kid exactly what they need, mostly based on what I love what Karen said. All of our kids come in with IEPs, and it's our obligation to go back and better understand. I think we have a duty to better understand our kids than the districts do. We have the opportunity to really take a look at all the information given to us, so we can really create a true IEP where we do assess, understand from that assessment, design a program. The missing part of the IEP is then the kids react to that program. Then they do the work, and so we have to go back and assess that work. And at our schools, we're able to do that every day. It's the IEP, or what we'll call as an SLSP, it's a living document, because that IEP is not just written once. Well, how are the kids doing? And I think that really is the biggest difference for our schools versus what happens in the public schools.
Tell me about staffing problems in the last few years, each of you. We've heard a lot about staffing shortages, both in the public schools and in private schools, and in general. Can you provide any more details on that? Why don't you go first, Karen?
Sure. You know, I think special education has always been a shortage area, as has speech pathologists and others. I think COVID was the beginning of the steeper decline. I know I experienced loss after COVID in terms of teacher retiring early. And I think it's been very difficult for us to recover since then. I have 7 classroom teachers, and I have 4 teachers who are new to Benhaven. 2 of those are new to teaching. So, and doing great, by the way, but, and paraeducators are also really hard to find. I think the additional, and this is some of the nuances I think about the differences in programs. You know, Benhaven School is a 12-month program. Lots of teachers expect summers off, and so it can be difficult to entice somebody to come work at a 12-month program. I think we're a great program to work at. but it's different. And so that's something that makes it even more challenging to find, especially teachers, but in some cases paraeducators too, that they don't, and that we don't really close for vacations. We close for 2 weeks. That's another kind of nuance, so that people are taking vacation time across the calendar year. And so we've got to build in our own substitutes. But the staffing shortage is real. I will say, a few years ago, we made a concerted effort to really increase our involvement with speech pathology departments at local universities, thinking that because we work with such a great population, that if we could at least get people into Benhaven, then we could entice them, speech pathologists as interns, we could entice them to stay. And that's been really successful for us. We're kind of a small school, but out of our 4 speech pathologists, 3 of them have come in that way. And so that's been really successful. And so trying to figure out other creative ways to encourage people into the profession, and then specifically to come to Benhaven.
Have you had to raise pay for paraeducators in order to have enough of them?
We have raised pay for paraeducators, absolutely, yeah.
And Jeff, do you want to respond to this? Staffing shortage?
Sure. It is a huge problem everywhere. And the same is true at the American School for the Deaf. Definitely more of an impact after COVID. And I don't think it's just short staffing, but also the kind of staff that we were seeing after COVID was very different. Many of them now want more of a work-life balance, and that's become a bigger challenge for us. In the past 2 years, we have 217 new staff members that we've brought on board. So, yeah, I see the expressions. Yeah, I mean, that is huge. So it's just hard. It's hard to find specialty staff for our population. In terms of teachers, we've been very fortunate. We have a wonderful relationship with a lot of student teaching programs across the country. And so we're able to bring in a lot of student teachers because the turnover is so high. It's higher than I've ever seen. It used to be teachers would stay for 20 or 30 years, and I don't see that anymore. Teachers usually stay for 3 to 5 years and then they move on. So we're bringing in a lot more student teachers. And from that, we're able to entice them to stay and become staff. And that really has been something that has saved our teaching profession. For the one-to-one paraprofessional staff, both for teachers, aides, and residential counselors, yes, there is definitely a high turnover rate, and that is something that is ongoing. And we are almost used to it now. We used to be short. However, now we are at 85 to 90% full on staffing levels for paraprofessionals and residential counselors. So in this past year, it's gotten better. We've done a lot more in-house training. We've offered more mentoring, and that seems to work for us. But yes, I think that's going to continue to be a challenge for sure. And each department is now building their own team little by little. So there's just a lot of outside consultant help that we've brought in to provide supports for our staff to try to encourage that retention. Now, our retention rate for teachers is really high, but for paraprofessionals, we're at about 67% right now. So it's better than where it was just a couple of years ago. But it definitely is a challenge.
Bill, do you want to remark on this?
Sure,
Oh, if I could just add one more thing, I'm
Okay,
sorry, if
sorry.
I could add one more thing. We do have 2 unions. We have a teachers union and a residential counselor union. And so there's a lot of union issues that come into play when we think about compensation and benefits. So that's just an additional layer that we have to factor in. But I think that both of the unions have become a team player in addressing all of this. So
Thank you.
I'm no longer, after listening to Jeff, I'm no longer going to complain about staffing issues. I am very lucky. We've had very little turnover, but finding teachers, finding good teachers has become increasingly hard. So usually when I post a job, I had a teacher leave, moved to New Jersey, and usually I'm used to, you put an ad out and I would get 20 great resumes. I get a lot of it, but 20 great resumes. I got 2 that I wanted to call in. 2. I posted everywhere, and I got 2 that I thought were worth me calling in. That's the real challenge. Young folks don't want to go into teaching. My older boys are 27 and 29. Their friends who started teaching in New York City left within 2 years because, well, for a number of reasons. A lot of the times they're not receiving the support. I think that's different in our schools. I think I'll speak for me, but I pretty much know that what happens at Benhaven, the American School for the Deaf, is the same. We take the training of our teachers very seriously. My fancy degree in learning disabilities from Teachers College doesn't exist anymore. It hasn't existed for a very long time. They're generic degrees in special education. And so you're not focusing on any of our kids' specific struggles. So we have an obligation to make sure that our teachers are up to best practice, up to latest research. What are we thinking about? And that's really important. And I think that our teacher retention is high because I have a lot of former public school teachers who are like, they finally found their home. I can really do the work that I want to do in this little school. And so I feel lucky, but I worry terribly about our profession.
So in terms of this legislation, when pressed, members of the select committee say, oh no, this is not to cut down costs of private placements, it's for transparency. Talk to me about what transparency there is, or what transparency, increased transparency there might be in terms of what you provide, and the cost to districts, and all those sorts of issues.
If I don't mind, I'm gonna try not to get soapboxy. We're unbelievably transparent with our districts. If they want to come in, at that hearing, they talked about wanting to open up our electric bills, come in and see all that. None of us are running fancy schools. We're running bare bone budgets to make things work. I think that level of cost, just come in and see. We're not paying our teachers the same. I'm working to pay our teachers the same that even Stanford, let alone, I can't touch Greenwich. Teachers are making a lot more money in district than they are at our schools. But I think that accountability piece is an important one. And I don't think any of us would dance around the idea that I'll invite them in. That's nothing for us to be afraid of.
Karen?
Yeah, I would agree completely with what Bill said. I will say visits from school districts obviously declined during COVID when we weren't allowed to have visitors in our schools at all. And I'm happy to say just in the last year, maybe 18 months, we've started to have more directors of special education come into our building, which I'm really happy about. We have one urban district that said she wants to make 3 visits each year, which is really great. And I think that's a step in the right direction. We have a district from far away who comes in for every single PPT, and we have a number of PPTs for this student. And I think getting to know our programs is really, really important so that they can also speak knowledgeably to their superintendent, who they have to answer to for some of these placements that are costly, and a superintendent is going to have questions. But there are a lot of things that we offer that I think are best seen coming in and really seeing the classroom, sit down and have an observation. Happy to have legislators. We've had legislators recently, but of course, anybody from the school district, the superintendent, and families, of course, come in and observe our programs.
Do you want to comment on this, Jeff? Or?
Yes. So even though they talked about the rate cap, we're already doing that. We are one of 4 schools in Connecticut that does do posting of our rates. And why we were selected as one of those 4 schools, I don't know, but we are reviewed by the Department of Education. And so for that reason, I just think it's really more about the frustration with certain special education placements that have astronomical costs. And I'm trying to say programs like ours, we've been in business for a long time and we're not trying to cheat the system. We can't cheat the system. We go through audits, we go through a lot of different processes, and we stay true to what we do on a daily basis. Just like Karen was saying, we welcome anybody to come visit our school. And I think when they realize the kinds of students we work with and the work that we do on a daily basis, they'll really understand. When we talk about the inclusive rate, and Bill, I'm on the same page as you. I like the idea of inclusive rates. And the reason for that is because our students are varied. So sometimes one student will need a one-to-one, maybe they can transition to group supervision, and then they can eventually become more independent. And then maybe there's one day of an issue and we have to go back and we have to call for a special PPT every time the student needs something else. And I think that would just make everybody so frustrated. And then having to track and document everything doesn't make sense, especially in a program like ours. And so I think that we don't want to give more work to people. The intention is just to ensure staff can do their job and that we're meeting the needs of the students every single day. That's why we have the IEPs in place. And so just getting into the nitty gritty and all those details, I don't want to give anybody more work. And we meet with OPM quite frequently. They review our rates, and even OPM themselves have said, please go ahead and increase the tuition that you are charging to districts. We're getting that directive from OPM because we want to make sure that our teachers are compensated in something that's comparable to their peers. And so now the idea of having to cap those rates, I'm not so sure what the true intention is here, but I think that probably will be something that they wean off of. And I think they'll realize that it's just a handful of special education programs that are out there making the rest of us look bad.
So some members of the committee are saying, well, it's not just about rates. It's also about educational progress. And we want to know that these schools are actually producing great outcomes. So what can we do to demonstrate outcomes? And it obviously it depends on the student and what's in the IEP. But could you talk more generally about that? I'll start with Bill since he's ready to go.
Yeah, because I'm embarrassed to say that I did not stay up for the entire hearing, but I'm very proud. One of my young teachers testified at 11:15, and I was the few members who were left to ask him questions talked about accountability, and what Max said was, what you've spent millions of dollars on CT sets. And all of we write goals for our kids and we assess those goals. You can go in, each district can go in and see the progress that the kids are making just based there on CT sets. It's something we take seriously. I mean, that's what we've done. I tried to, when they announced CT sets, it was this big, what are we going to do? But teaching our teachers to write great goals and then teaching our teachers to do great assessments and how we're going to do that. When that's what good teaching is all about. What are we going to teach our kids? How do I know what they know? And put that back in. So now they have a system to do that. So there were lots of questions asked that night where no one did their homework about really actually how special education works.
Karen, for your kids, measuring progress is much more challenging, right?
Well, it is, and it's different. I mean, our student body you can't measure their success by a standardized assessment, for example. Many of our students also struggle with the alternate assessment. And so you have to really look, as Bill said, to the IEP, which is a rigorous IEP written for them, for where they are, approved by their family and the entire planning and placement team. So there are checks and balances certainly in the system. If a family member or district didn't think that it was high quality enough, that's why we have our meetings to talk more about that. But some of the success for us is measured by a parent who recently sent me a picture and an email saying that her son was able to stay with her for the entire worship service in church. And that was really, really important to her. Or a student who learned some new job skills and is now being supervised by an employee of the work site as opposed to having a job coach. Those are some of the measures of success that are really hard to capture and hard to have one measure across all approved private special education programs. Even across those that work with similar populations, the measures of success are going to be different, but they're there. And if you ask the planning and placement team about them, they can count them off to you for sure.
Jeff.
I fully agree with both Bill and Karen. Even the measurements that Bill or Karen use would be different in our program. And there is no one size that fits all. And that's why we have the I in IEP. It's all about the individual child. It's not about everybody. And when we talk about outcomes for us on an annual basis, I take my senior class, and all the seniors know the rules by now. I host an executive dinner with all of the senior class. After the dinner is done, they know they have to get up to the front of the room and tell me what their plans are for graduation. I don't care if they're going on to work. If that's what they want to do, that's great. If they're going to a group home, that's great. If they're going to college, that is great. They cannot, however, say, I'm just going to go back home and do nothing. That is just not allowed. And so that is the outcome. That is what brings me so much joy. And again, it all comes back to the issue of language for us, because 12 years ago, when I started, the average age of a student enrolling at our school was 14 years old. And it was that age because they had failed so many times in the public school setting. The public school tried every support they could think of, they failed, and then they bring the child to our doorstep and say, please save this child. At 14 years old, what a task. We'd only have 6 or 7 more years with them. How do you expect us to do miracles? Now, we do a lot of miracles and wonderful work, but we also have to be realistic. Public school students that can hear have language access from the very beginning. Why are we getting these deaf and hard of hearing students at such later ages? Give them to us first. Let us help them develop those strong language foundations. This year, our average age of enrollment is now 6.7 years old. And that shows me we've done a better job educating and explaining the importance of early language exposure and acquisition. There are some years that I have 20 students graduating, and out of those 23 go on to college, the rest go on to a group home. Some may go on to work, whatever the case may be, that's fine. But this year I have 7 graduates. Out of those 7 graduates, 5 are going on to college. That is absolutely amazing. And for those 5 that are going on to college, all 5 of them came to ASD at the age of 3.5 years old. And so the proof is right there. They've had those strong language foundations, and now they've gone on to do really well. And so my argument with the public schools is, can you do that kind of work? Let's compare the data. Let's do the language assessments. Let's do things the right way. But those are the kinds of data points, and that's the kind of evidence that we really have to bring to the forefront to educate people and explain why we are all here, to make sure we're addressing those needs. Because if we're not addressing those needs at the earliest ages, ultimately it's going to cost the state so much more later on to support those children for the rest of their lives.
Is the number of kids you return back to the public school an indicator of success?
Sometimes. It depends on what's next. It depends on the profile of the kid. I think that Jeff just said some kids go off to college, some kids go off to a group home. I think the independence is important for all of us. That we preach independence. I don't want anyone to go back home. I saw like going back to the parents' couch. Sometimes it's to another supportive LD high school, but our goal is to get them back to be more independent, to be skilled kids. They're often going back to district, they're doing well in district. And I think that's what's helped districts see that they can believe in our program, that we're serious about that. But it means different things for different kids, depending upon what their profile is.
And Karen, do you send kids back to districts sometimes?
We do sometimes, not often. But I will say, I agree for a student. We have a student who will be starting back this summer not in a public school, but moving from Benhaven to a RESC, which is great progress for him and is success for him. But the opposite of that, somebody not going back to district doesn't mean failure. It means that they're in the place that they're doing well, and the supports that they need are being provided to them, and that this is the best setting for them at that time. I will say that we've had a couple of students who've returned to district with the last 2 years of eligibility, so maybe 19, 20, to participate in their district's transition program. And that's worked out really well. And we've really encouraged families to do that because these have been students who live at home. And so that's going to be their community when they exit special education. And so it makes really good sense for them to get back into that community in the last couple of years, work on finding a job, developing relationships in that community. So that's been a really good transition for some of our students.
Jeff?
In our case, we do have some students who are able to speak and hear well. They may stay at ASD and get those supports. And then by the time they reach 3rd grade, they may be able to go on to a mainstream program. Some students start a half day at our school, half day at the public school to be able to have that smoother transition. And we do provide additional supports to make sure that they're still supported in the public school and able to thrive in those mainstream programs. We have other students that try to go back, but we realize they're just not happy and they want to come back to ASD because of that peer-to-peer interaction that they're able to have. And so that's what I'm talking about with the least restrictive environment. Those students feel like ASD is the least restrictive environment because when they go out to the public school, there are mental health issues, there's social issues, there's a lot of communication issues, and they don't have to face that at our school. So I think we have to look at what is best for every individual child. The IEP, that's the whole reason why we have that. And every single year we sit down, we come together as a team, we evaluate, make sure that students getting appropriate supports. If they're not, we figure out what else we can do to support that child.
Okay, let me conclude with this. I'm spending a lot of time in the Capitol on this legislation. And the word I'm getting is that some form of rate setting is going to take place. Tell me, what would an appropriate rate setting system look like? And I want to start with Karen because you do have a residential program, right?
We do have a residential program, and I've thought about this question a lot over the last several months. What would rate setting look like? Honestly, I have a very hard time imagining what it would look like. And for many of the reasons that we've talked about tonight, just the nuances, the complexities of the students, the differences across schools, again, even schools that serve generally the same population. There are differences among those schools, and the priorities that each of those schools set and where they where they excel and how those priorities match the planning and placement team and the family's priorities. So Andy, I have a very hard time imagining a model for rate setting. I'm disappointed that you started with me on this question because I would have loved to hear what Jeff and Bill have to say about it because I really do have a hard time thinking about what it would be.
But you do have some rate setting for your residential programs, don't you?
I'm not as well versed in the rate setting for our residential programs, but our group homes are licensed by DDS. Yes.
Okay. All right, Jeff, you were called on there. You're up.
Okay. So in terms of rate setting, as I said before, our rates, honestly, we have nothing to hide. It's either 42,000 all the way up to the highest rate we have over the last 5 years was about 752,000. And that's within a year. And that's for one student, just one student. And some people say that is crazy. And I say, that's fine. But let's think about that student. That student must have a nurse with them day and night, 24 hours a day. They have a teacher with them all day. They have to have a residential counselor with them all day and all night. For transportation, we have to have a special bus for that particular student. And all of that, and that happens once in a blue moon. And, this one particular student I'm thinking of has graduated from our school, has gone on to a group home, is doing very well, is eligible to vote, is doing amazing. And to me, that's a tremendous success. And so when we think about the rates, it's a wide range of rates depending on the individual, but that's the discussion that should happen at the PPT meeting. The IEP determines what is needed, and then the rates, I mean, I invite people to come look at our financials, come look at our books. We are not making this up. And again, all of our rates are approved by the State Department of Education, but our residential treatment program is licensed and approved for by the Department of Children and Families by cost accounting. And so it is what it is. And we just follow. We don't increase those rates. We don't put any fluff in, none of that. The rates are what they are. And so if they want to do the rate setting system, I mean, they're going to have to develop some kind of formula or figure out what's appropriate, but it's going to have to be what will allow us to continue to provide these kinds of services. Because if we all go out of business, I don't know what the state's going to do. They're going to face a lot of lawsuits, honestly.
Andy, and you'll know more about this than I. The last conversation I had with one of the reps on the select committee, she talked to me about one of the new ideas was having tiers. And my worry about tiers or even cost setting is that who's making those decisions? Who's establishing those formulas? How do I decide that Jeff gets one thing, Karen gets another, and Bill gets a third? Who's making those decisions? The same Board of Education people, the people in the district, is it people in the state? I worry about that because if they don't understand what's happening in special education and they don't truly understand our kids' needs, then how are they going to determine what rates are appropriate?
Okay, always my final question is this. Tell me something that gives you hope. Bill, you could go first.
I'll go for, I mean, our kids, so I get frustrated, I get worried, and then I leave my office and I go into the classroom. And you see the joy, you see the learning, and you remember this is why we're here, this is why we do what we do. It's that easy.
That's a great answer. Of course, I think, and when you ask people why they stay, the first answer is always they stay because of the kids, because of the reward that they get from the kids. I will say also working with newer teachers in the last couple of years also gives me hope because they are they're few, but they're really excited about the profession. They're so eager to learn. They're really committed and devoted to their students. That's been such a positive experience for me over the last couple of years as we've had more newer teachers join our community.
Last word for you, Jeff. What gives you hope?
I echo what Bill and Karen both have said. People often ask why I wouldn't take another job at a university for the deaf or somewhere else. And I say, honestly, in our profession, 90% of the time we spend dealing with adults, HR issues, financial issues, people issues. And oftentimes I see problem after problem. And when it gets frustrating, I take a walk down the hall and I see our students. I see our students that are in wheelchairs. I see the students learning in the classrooms and the joy. And that is what inspires me and gets me up every single morning, knowing that I'm making a difference in their lives on a daily basis. If I was to go to a university or a different job, it would be very different. I am committed to seeing our children succeed. And I think ultimately that's what keeps me going every single day. And so knowing that legislators that come through our doors or parents that come through our doors, they see those smiling faces, they see that joy. And that's what we want to remember every single day. And that's what keeps us motivated.
Well, I thank all three of you. This is terrific. This is really good. And I'm going to copy the link and send it to each member of the select committee so they can maybe view this and see what we're talking about here. And that, I think that'd be very helpful. So thank you. And Dana, do you want to close it out?
I was just going to say thank you everyone for coming. It's so wonderful to see such dedicated people for these private schools because we need them so terribly bad. I hope, sorry, that's my dog. It's going to be nuts. So I'll just say thank you for joining us. Speak is amazing. They're trying to make a huge difference. So please donate if you feel so compelled. And we'll see you next time on Seek Speaks.
Thank you, everybody.
Dana, thank you very much for this.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much.